It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
"Give me the pen," Derek Riley snapped, his voice cutting through the hushed elegance of the bistro as he shoved a thick stack of legal documents across the white linen. "You don't even use your credit for anything besides buying sensible shoes and cat food, Sabrina. Just sign the damn ratification and let us get back to the celebration." Sabrina Riley looked at her brother, then at the gathered family. They were seated in a private alcove of the city's most expensive steakhouse, a place where the scent of charred wagyu and aged bourbon hung heavy in the air. Derek was glowing, his Rolex Submariner catching the amber light of the chandelier as he gestured toward his fiancée. Tiffany sat beside him, her hand weighed down by a 2-carat diamond that Sabrina was now certain had been purchased with stolen funds. "I haven't even read it yet, Derek," she said, her voice remaining level despite the heat rising in her chest. "There's nothing to read," he scoffed, leaning back and checking his watch with practiced arrogance. "It's a simple correction. The bank made a clerical error on the business loan for my new firm. They just need your signature to clear up the paperwork. It's a formality." "A formality that involves a $150,000 liability?" she asked. Derek rolled his eyes, looking toward their parents for support. Cynthia Riley reached out, her hand trembling with a practiced fragility as she clutched at the silk scarf around her neck. "Sabrina, please, don't start one of your audits tonight. Your brother is finally making something of himself. He's a CEO now. Don't let your little government job make you bitter about his success." "It's not about bitterness, Mom," Sabrina replied, her fingers grazing the cold, beaded condensation on her water glass. The chill was a tether, keeping her grounded while the familiar weight of family gaslighting threatened to pull her under. "It's about the fact that I never applied for this loan, which means my name was put on these documents without my consent." Derek leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like the same playground bully who used to break her toys and tell their parents she'd tripped. "Listen to me, you boring little clerk. People like you spend your lives counting other people's money because you're too afraid to make your own. I'm building an empire. In 6 months, that signature won't even matter because I'll be a millionaire 10 times over. You should be thanked for being part of the foundation." He snapped his fingers at a passing waitress without looking at her. "Waitress, my sister here needs a glass of the house white, the cheapest one you have. It'll match her sensible department store blazer." The table erupted in Derek's sharp, barking laughter. Ronald Riley joined in, shaking his head at Sabrina with a look of disappointed pity. "He's family, Sabrina. We look out for each other. Now, sign the paper so we can order the lobster. I didn't come here to watch you play detective." Sabrina felt the familiar sting of betrayal, but it was different this time. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of her youth. It was cold, analytical. She was a senior forensic auditor for the Department of Justice. She spent her days dismantling international money laundering rings and tracing offshore accounts that belonged to men far more dangerous and far smarter than her brother. She reached into her blazer pocket, her thumb grazing the smooth screen of her phone. The recording app had been running since the moment Derek mentioned the paperwork. "You're right, Dad," she said, her voice dropping into the flat, professional monotone she used when delivering a deposition. "Family should look out for each other." She picked up the pen. Derek's face lit up with a predatory triumph, his chest swelling as he prepared to gloat. He thought he'd won. He thought she was still the girl who would cave just to stop the shouting at the dinner table. Sabrina didn't sign. Instead, she slowly uncapped the pen and drew a single, thick line through the signature block. Then, she tucked the pen into her own purse. "I'll be taking these home," she said, sliding the documents into her briefcase before Derek could react. "Since my name is already on them, they're technically mine." The silence that followed was absolute. The clinking of silver against bone china at the neighboring tables seemed to amplify the stillness in their alcove. Derek's face went from smug victory to a blotchy, enraged purple in seconds. "Give those back," he hissed, his voice trembling with a sudden, sharp edge of panic. "Sabrina, I'm warning you. Those are private business documents. Then you shouldn't have forged a federal officer's identity to get them, she whispered back, leaning in just close enough for him to smell the expensive scotch on his own breath. Cynthia gasped, her hand flying to her heart. Sabrina, your brother is a good boy. How could you say such a thing? Because I've already seen the digital footprint, Mom, Sabrina said, standing up. The heavy mahogany chair scraped against the marble floor, a jarring, violent sound that made Tiffany jump. Derek, you used my DOJ employee ID as a guarantor. That's not just identity theft. That's a felony against the government. She looked at her father, who was suddenly very interested in his salad, and then at her brother, whose arrogance was rapidly being replaced by the frantic look of a cornered animal. I'm leaving, Sabrina announced, her voice carrying just enough to make the surrounding tables turn. And Derek, I'd suggest you don't spend any more of that loan money. The paper trail doesn't just lead to me. It leads to every forged signature you've used in the last 3 years. She walked out of the restaurant without looking back, the heavy glass doors clicking shut behind her. The cool Phoenix night air felt like a benediction. She walked to her car, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the pavement. Once inside the safety of her vehicle, she didn't start the engine. She pulled out her phone and looked at the recording. Then, she opened a secondary file, a series of screenshots from a private database she'd accessed that morning. Derek hadn't just stolen her credit. He had been using their parents' house as collateral for 3 other consultancy loans. She dialed a number she'd had saved for weeks, the one she'd been hesitant to use until she saw the depths of his entitlement tonight. Detective Miller, she said when the line picked up. This is Sabrina Riley. I have the recorded confession and the original forged documents you asked for. We're ready to move. She ended the call and looked at the restaurant's glowing entrance. The celebration was still going on inside, but the clock had just started ticking. Derek thought he was building an empire, but he had no idea he'd just handed his sister the matches. The next morning, the Riley family kitchen was thick with the scent of expensive dark roast coffee and the cloyingly sweet, suffocating aroma of Cynthia's lilies. Sabrina Riley sat at the breakfast nook, her eyes fixed on the flickering screen of her laptop. To anyone else, the columns of numbers were a blur of financial jargon. To her, a DOJ forensic auditor, they were a confession written in digital ink. She could see every shell company Derek had registered, every cent he'd siphoned from their parents' equity, and the exact moment he'd forged her name on the 3rd consultancy loan. Derek Riley strolled in 10 minutes later, his silk robe billowing. He didn't look like a man who had spent the night committing white-collar crimes. He looked like a man who believed the world was his personal ATM. He didn't even glance at his sister as he reached for the crystal carafe on the counter. Sabrina, move your laptop, he snapped, his voice rough and heavy with the arrogance of the previous night's celebration. I need space for the catering menus. The gala is in 3 days, and Tiffany wants the seating chart for the VIPs perfect. Sabrina didn't move. She felt the familiar heat of a rage spike behind her eyes, but she kept her fingers steady on the keys. It's a public holiday, Derek. Can't the Empire wait until Monday? He laughed, a sharp, condescending sound that grated against her nerves like glass on stone. Success doesn't take holidays. But then, a government paper pusher wouldn't understand that, would you? You're used to clocking out at 5 while people like me are actually building a legacy. Cynthia Riley fluttered into the room then, clutching a silk handkerchief to her temple in a practiced gesture of fragility. Oh, Sabrina, don't start with your brother. My head is absolutely splitting after all the excitement of his announcement. Be a dear and get Derek his protein shake. He's exhausted from all the high-level planning. The audacity was a physical weight in the room. Her mother was already playing the martyr, shielding her golden boy from the slightest inconvenience while expecting the daughter he'd robbed to serve him. I'm busy, Mom, Sabrina said, her voice cooling to a professional edge. Ronald Riley entered from the patio, his face set in a mask of stern, fatherly disappointment. He walked straight to Sabrina and leaned over her shoulder, his breath smelling of expensive cigars and unearned entitlement. Your brother mentioned there was a little. Clerical hiccup with the house title, Sabrina. Something about a secondary signature for the last loan. I told him you'd take care of it today. Family helps family after all. There it was. The second offense. They weren't just asking her to ignore the theft. They were demanding she facilitate her own financial ruin to fund Derek's delusions. They were all in on it, convinced that Sabrina was too weak, too loyal, to ever fight back. "The house title is fine, Dad," Sabrina replied, her voice like ice. She closed the laptop with a sharp, final asterisk thud. "As long as no one does anything they can't undo." Derek paused, his hand hovering over a plate of pastries. His eyes narrowed, the mask of the successful entrepreneur slipping to reveal the bully beneath. "Illegal? Watch your tone. I'm the one putting this family on the map. In 72 hours, when I launch the Riley Fund at the Phoenix Plaza, you'll be begging for a seat at my table. Until then, stay out of the way of real business." Sabrina stood, the weight of the recording on her phone and the forensic files on her drive acting as a silent, powerful anchor. She touched the small, silver thumb drive in her pocket, the secret power that held the keys to Derek's kingdom. She knew something he didn't. The consultancy loans weren't just unethical. They were the foundation of a federal wire fraud case she had already mapped out for the authorities. 3 days, Sabrina murmured, more to herself than to him. "What was that?" Derek sneered, stepping into her personal space. The smell of his overpriced, musky cologne clashing with the kitchen's warmth made her stomach turn. "I said, I hope the gala is everything you've dreamed of," she said, meeting his gaze with a terrifyingly calm smile. "I'll be there. I wouldn't miss your big reveal for the world." She walked out of the kitchen before he could respond, leaving the three of them in their bubble of unearned confidence. As she reached the privacy of the hallway, her phone buzzed in her palm. It was a text from Detective Miller. "Documents verified. We have the warrant for the digital records. We move at the event." Sabrina leaned against the wall, her heart hammering a steady, vengeful beat. Derek thought he was counting down to his coronation. He had no idea he was actually counting down to his collapse. 2 days later, the dry heat of Phoenix felt like a physical weight, but the interior of Detective Miller's unmarked sedan was bone-chillingly cold. Sabrina Riley sat in the passenger seat, the scent of stale coffee and old upholstery clinging to the air. Outside, the shimmering haze of the asphalt made the world look unstable, a fitting reflection of the life her brother had built on a foundation of lies. Miller didn't waste time with pleasantries. He handed her a slim, black folder and a silver USB drive. The metal felt heavy and freezing against her palm, a tactile anchor for the storm she was about to unleash. "You were right about the offshore accounts," Miller said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that barely carried over the hum of the air conditioner. "Derek didn't just forge your name on the loan. He's been siphoning funds from your mother's medical trust to pad his crypto-exchange liquidity. It's a classic Ponzi structure, Sabrina. He's using new investor deposits to pay for that lifestyle he flaunts." Sabrina felt a cold prickle of satisfaction. As a DOJ auditor, she'd seen this pattern 100 times, but seeing it attached to her own blood made her blood boil. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the forensic trail. There it was, the digital footprint of a coward. Derek Riley had been gambling with their mother's future to buy the illusion of success. "Does he know?" she asked, her voice steady. "He thinks he's untouchable," Miller replied. "My team has the digital warrants. We've flagged the accounts. The moment he tries to move a single cent during that gala presentation, the system will lock him out. We'll be in the wings waiting for your signal." Sabrina gripped the USB drive until the edges bit into her skin. 48 hours, she whispered. "He has 2 more days of being a king. Then the crown comes off." She left the car and drove back to the family estate, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion that felt more like a mausoleum every day. As she stepped into the foyer, the sound of high-pitched laughter drifted from the living room. The scent of expensive lilies, Cynthia's favorite, was suffocatingly thick. Derek was there, sprawled on the velvet sofa, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked up as Sabrina entered, his smirk widening. Beside him, Cynthia was fussing over a seating chart, her face tightened by years of expensive procedures and the practiced worry she used as a weapon. "There she is," Derek drawled, his voice dripping with the unearned confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "The government drone returns to the hive. Hard day of staring at spreadsheets, Sabrina." "Something like that," she said, her tone neutral. She moved toward the stairs, but Ronald Riley stepped out from the study, blocking her path. Her father's face was a mask of stern disappointment, the same look he'd given her when she chose a career in law enforcement over the family's real business interests. "Your brother is trying to celebrate, Sabrina," Ronald said, his voice booming with forced authority. "The gala is the launch of the Riley legacy. The least you could do is show some support instead of lurking in the corners like a tax collector." "I'm just here for the show, Dad," she replied, her hand tightening on the strap of her laptop bag, where the USB drive lay hidden. Derek stood up, his designer loafers silent on the marble floor as he closed the distance between them. He leaned in, the smell of musky, overpriced cologne and expensive bourbon hitting her like a wave. "You're just jealous," he hissed, low enough that their parents couldn't hear. "You spent your life playing by the rules, and where did it get you? A government salary and a cramped apartment. I made more in a weekend of trading than you'll see in a decade. You're a footnote, Sabrina. I'm the headline." He reached out and flicked the lapel of her modest blazer with a look of pure disgust. "Try to wear something that doesn't scream civil servant on Friday. Tiffany's family will be there, and I don't want you embarrassing us in front of people who actually matter." Sabrina didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her eyes as cold as the evidence in her bag. "I'll make sure I'm dressed for the occasion, Derek. I promise it'll be a night no one forgets." "That's my girl," Cynthia chirped from the sofa, completely oblivious to the venom in the room. "Oh, and Sabrina, dear, Derek's latest venture hit a small, technical snag, just a temporary liquidity issue. Your father and I were thinking you could co-sign a bridge loan for the gala expenses, just until Monday. It's for the family." The audacity of the request was a physical blow. They wanted her to fund the very event where her brother would brag about the money he'd stolen from her. She looked at Ronald, who wouldn't meet her eyes, and then at Derek, who was watching her with a predatory glint of triumph. He thought he had her trapped. He thought the family bond was a leash he could pull whenever he needed more. "I'll think about it," Sabrina said, her voice a terrifyingly calm whisper. She turned and walked up the stairs, her heart hammering a steady, vengeful rhythm. Behind her, she heard Derek laugh, a sharp, entitled sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Safe in her room, she locked the door and pulled out the USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop, watching the files populate the screen. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Derek Riley's ego. She looked at the countdown clock on her phone. 47 hours. He was so busy looking down at her that he hadn't noticed she was holding the ladder he was standing on. And in 2 days, she was going to kick it away. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tiffany. "Is everything okay? Derek is acting strange. He's talking about moving all our assets to a private server tonight. I'm scared, Sabrina." Sabrina's fingers flew across the keys. "Stay quiet. Don't question him. Just make sure you're at the gala. The truth is coming out, Tiffany, all of it." She closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The rage that had been a dull roar for years had sharpened into a cold, surgical precision. Derek thought he was the master of the digital world. He had no idea that a paper pusher was about to delete his entire reality in front of the very people he craved to impress. The countdown continued. The trap was set, the evidence was secured, and the arrogance of the Riley men had provided the perfect blinders. Friday night wasn't just a gala, it was an execution. The morning before the Riley Foundation gala, the family estate hummed with the frantic energy of a stage being set for a tragedy. Sabrina Riley stood in the shadow of the grand staircase, watching a team of florists arrange thousands of white roses. The scent was cloying, thick enough to choke the air out of the foyer, but she didn't move. She was the ghost in the machine now, a silent observer of the empire she was about to incinerate. "Sabrina, why are you just standing there like a statue?" Cynthia Riley's voice cut through the air, sharp and impatient. She was clutching a seating chart as if it were a holy relic. Your brother is about to make history tomorrow night, and you haven't even confirmed your dress. Honestly, sometimes I think you don't care about this family's legacy at all. I care very much about the truth of our legacy, Mother, she replied, her voice a calm, steady ribbon of silk. Cynthia huffed, adjusting her pearls. The truth is that Derek is a visionary. He's moving the family assets to a private server tonight for maximum security. He's protecting us. Unlike you, with your little government desk job, he actually understands how the modern world works. A cold smile touched Sabrina's lips. She felt the weight of the encrypted drive in her pocket, a physical anchor to the reality her brother was desperately trying to outrun. He wasn't moving assets for security. He was trying to hide the digital breadcrumbs of his forgery before the audit hit. Derek Riley descended the stairs then, his silk robe billowing. He looked every bit the king of a kingdom built on sand. He didn't even look at his sister as he reached for a glass of imported sparkling water from a passing caterer's tray. The cold condensation on the crystal was the only thing more brittle than his ego. "The transfer starts at midnight, Cynthia," he said, his voice dripping with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence. He finally turned to Sabrina, a smirk playing on his lips. "You look worried, little sister. Is the big, bad digital world too complicated for a forensic auditor to follow? Don't worry. Once I'm the face of the new decentralized finance sector, I might find a spot for you in the filing department." "Be careful, Derek," she said softly. "The higher you build a house of cards, the harder the wind blows. Are you sure that server is as private as you think it is?" He let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. "I built the architecture myself. I'm the only one with the keys. You're just a paper pusher who spends her days looking at spreadsheets. You wouldn't know a blockchain from a clothesline." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne, something citrusy and aggressive, invading her space. "Tomorrow night, when the Riley name is synonymous with the future of wealth, you'll realize just how small you are. You're a footnote, Sabrina, nothing more." Across the room, Tiffany stood by the window, her face a mask of pale terror. She caught Sabrina's eye for a split second, a silent plea for help vibrating between them before she looked away, her fingers trembling against the velvet curtains. She knew the walls were closing in, even if her fiancé was too blinded by his own reflection to see the cracks. Ronald Riley joined them, clapping a hand on his son's shoulder. The betrayal in his eyes was masked by a desperate, hungry greed. "He's right, Sabrina. Stop being a killjoy. This is Derek's moment. The board members, the press, everyone will be there to witness the rise of the Riley era." "Oh, I'm counting on it," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I've made sure everyone will see exactly what Derek has built." The arrogance in the room was a physical weight, but Sabrina felt lighter than she had in years. She watched her father and brother exchange a smug look, completely missing the predatory stillness in her posture. They saw a defeated sister. They didn't see the auditor who had already mapped every illicit transaction, every forged signature, and every stolen cent. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the marble floor, Sabrina retreated to her room. She opened her laptop one last time. The countdown on her screen flickered. 18 hours. The trap wasn't just set, the door was already locking. Derek thought he was moving his stolen fortune to safety, but he was actually hand-delivering the final piece of evidence into the DOJ's waiting arms. She leaned back, listening to the distant sound of the caterers setting up the ballroom below. The clink of silver and the rustle of linens sounded like the sharpening of a blade. Tomorrow, the world would see the visionary for what he truly was, and Sabrina would be the one to turn on the lights. The evening of the gala arrived with a suffocating layer of opulence that only Derek could find tasteful. The ballroom of the Phoenix Heights Resort had been transformed into a shrine of gold leaf and velvet, a physical manifestation of a fortune built on digital air and stolen signatures. Sabrina Riley stood near the periphery, her fingers tracing the cold condensation on her water glass. She had chosen a charcoal gray suit, sharp, professional, and utterly invisible against the backdrop of glittering evening gowns. It was the uniform of an auditor, a silent witness to the carnage of a collapsing empire. The scent of seared Wagyu beef, the titular golden steak of the evening, hung heavy in the air, mingling with the cloying, floral notes of Cynthia's perfume. Her mother was already adrift in the crowd, draped in a diamond necklace that Sabrina recognized from a high-end rental catalog, her face fixed in a mask of practiced fragility. She was playing the role of the matriarch to perfection, leaning on the arm of anyone who looked wealthy enough to offer a sympathetic ear to her latest medical mystery. "You look like you're here to serve a subpoena, not celebrate a milestone," a voice dripped with condescension. Sabrina didn't need to turn to know it was him. Derek Riley approached, his stride radiating the unearned confidence of a man who believed he had finally outrun his own shadow. He was wearing a tuxedo that likely cost more than a year of her mortgage, a glass of vintage champagne held loosely in his hand. Beside him, Tiffany hovered like a nervous shadow, her eyes darting toward Sabrina with a flicker of something that looked dangerously like pity. "It's a professional habit," she replied, her voice level. "I like to be prepared for every eventuality." He let out a sharp, jagged laugh that drew the attention of a nearby group of investors. "Always the buzzkill. You see all this, Sabrina? This is what happens when you stop counting other people's pennies and start making your own. But I guess some people are just born to be background noise." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of expensive bubbles and arrogance. "Try not to look so miserable. It's bad for the brand." And Tiffany doesn't want her future sister-in-law looking like a debt collector at her engagement announcement. Tiffany's smile was brittle. "Derek, maybe we should." "She's fine, Tiff," he snapped, dismissively waving a hand. "She's just bitter because she's still checking boxes for the government while I'm building the future. Go get us another round, would you? The good stuff, not the swill they're serving at the open bar." As Tiffany hurried away, Sabrina felt the familiar heat of a rage spike tightening her chest. It wasn't just the insult. It was the casual way he treated everyone as an extension of his own ego. She watched him turn back to his circle of sycophants, regaling them with a fabricated story about his latest crypto arbitrage win. He was the sun in his own solar system, oblivious to the fact that he was already in a terminal burn. A heavy hand landed on her shoulder, the grip firm and warning. Ronald Riley stood there, his face a map of suppressed tension. He didn't look like a proud father, he looked like a man standing on a landmine. "I told you to stay home if you couldn't keep that look off your face," her father whispered, his voice a low growl. "Tonight is about your brother's legacy. If you do anything to embarrass this family, Sabrina, I swear I'll make sure you're erased from it permanently. You've had your fun playing the whistleblower. Now you sit down, you shut up, and you smile for the cameras." "Is that what you call it, Dad? A legacy?" She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I call it a house of cards." "And the wind is picking up." He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're so smart, but Derek is the one with the vision. You're just a bean counter with a grudge. Don't forget who paid for that degree you're so proud of. You owe us." He turned and walked away before she could respond, heading toward the head table where the golden steak was being carved with theatrical flair. The sound of silver clinking against fine china echoed through the room like the ticking of a clock. Sabrina reached into her pocket and felt the vibration of her phone. She didn't pull it out. She didn't need to. The encrypted DOJ alert had already flashed across her smartwatch, target in sight. Assets frozen, team in position. She took a slow breath, letting the sensory details of the room anchor her. The hum of the violins, the warmth of the overhead chandeliers, the weight of the digital evidence sitting on a server 5 miles away. She felt a predatory stillness settle over her. For 25 years, she had been the quiet one, the disappointment, the girl who didn't understand the family business of smoke and mirrors. She watched as Derek stepped onto the small, raised dais at the front of the room. He tapped the microphone, the feedback screeching through the ballroom and silencing the chatter. He looked out over the crowd, his chest puffed out, the light catching the gold watch he'd bought with the money he'd diverted from her college fund. "Friends, investors, family," Derek began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Tonight isn't just about a steak or a party. It's about the realization of a dream. They said crypto was a gamble. They said the Riley name was finished. But look around you." Sabrina caught Tiffany's eye from across the room. The younger woman looked pale, her hand trembling as she held her glass. She knew, or at least she was starting to see the cracks. "I have a special announcement to make," he continued, flashing a predatory grin toward the back of the room where a group of men in dark suits had just entered. He thought they were late-arriving venture capitalists. He thought they were there to hand him another check. A move that will change the landscape of this industry forever. Sabrina stepped forward, moving out of the shadows and into the light of the main floor. She wasn't hiding anymore. She watched as Detective Miller made eye contact with her from the foyer, a slight professional nod being the only signal she needed. The countdown in her head hit 0. "Wait for it," she whispered to herself, the words lost in the rising applause. Derek raised his glass high, the amber liquid shimmering. "To the future," he shouted, "and to the man who built it." As he brought the glass to his lips, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open, they were held. The music died a sudden, jagged death. The men in the dark suits didn't head for the bar. They headed for the stage. Derek's smile faltered, his glass pausing midair as he realized the men weren't smiling back. He looked toward his father, then toward Sabrina, his eyes finally finding her in the crowd. For the first time in his life, the arrogance in his expression flickered, replaced by a cold, creeping realization that the background noise was about to become the only sound in the room. The silence in the ballroom was so absolute it felt heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the 300 guests who had, only seconds ago, been cheering for a lie. Sabrina Riley didn't look at the men in suits as they fanned out across the perimeter. She kept her eyes locked on her brother. She could smell the expensive lilies decorating the stage and the sharp, metallic tang of the cooling catering trays, but her focus was entirely on the man standing behind the podium. Derek Riley gripped the edge of the mahogany stand so hard his knuckles turned a ghostly white. He tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a brittle, strangled sound. "Sabrina, what is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking as he looked toward the security team that wasn't moving to help him. "Tell your friends to leave. This is a private launch. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, Derek," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the vacuum of the room, it carried to the very back row. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. She tapped a single command on the tablet she had carried in like a shield. The massive LED screen behind Derek, which had been looping a slick animation of his new crypto token, flickered and died. A second later, it roared back to life, but the vibrant blues and golds were gone. In their place was a stark, black-and-white spreadsheet. At the top, in the bold, unmistakable header of the Department of Justice, were the words, "Forensic Audit Report Riley Global Holdings." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sabrina saw Ronald Riley rise from his seat in the front row, his face turning a mottled purple as he realized the documents on the screen were the ones he had tried to blackmail her into destroying. Beside him, Cynthia Riley clutched her throat, her eyes darting around the room, looking for a way to spin the disaster before it even fully landed. "If you'll all look at the third column," Sabrina said, her tone as clinical and detached as if she were back in her office at the DOJ. "You'll see a series of transfers totaling $4 million. These weren't seed investments for a new blockchain. They were withdrawals from a trust account Derek forged my signature to access." Derek's face didn't just pale. It seemed to physically deflate, the skin around his jaw tightening as the blood fled his cheeks. A frantic, rhythmic twitch started beneath his left eye, a tiny pulse of panic he couldn't suppress. His mouth hung open, a silent, dark O of disbelief, while a bead of sweat tracked a slow, glistening path from his hairline down to his designer collar. The arrogance that usually defined his features was replaced by a raw, naked terror, making him look smaller, older, and utterly cornered. He looked like a man watching his own execution in high definition. Tiffany, standing just off stage in her $5,000 silk gown, took a staggering step back. She looked at the screen, then at the man she was supposed to marry, her hands covering her mouth. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The ring on her finger, the gala, the very floor she was standing on had been bought with stolen money. She didn't move toward him. She moved away, her heels clicking a frantic retreat on the hardwood. "You're lying." Derek finally screamed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He lunged toward the tablet in Sabrina's hand, but he was too slow. Detective Miller stepped onto the stage, his hand resting firmly on the heavy leather of his belt. He didn't need to draw a weapon. The sheer weight of the truth had already disarmed the room. "Derek Riley," the detective said, his voice a low, professional rumble that cut through Derek's hysterics. "You need to step away from the podium." Sabrina stood her ground as her brother was forced back. The room was a sea of raised phones and horrified whispers. The elite of Phoenix, the people Derek had spent years trying to impress, were now recording his downfall. She felt a strange, cold peace. The wine stain on her dress from earlier in the week felt like a badge of honor now. She leaned into the microphone one last time, her gaze sweeping over her stunned parents before settling on her brother's trembling form. "You told me I didn't belong in this room, Derek," she said, her voice like a scalpel. "You were right. I don't belong in a room built on theft, and as of 5 minutes ago, neither do you." She turned and walked off the stage, the sound of her own footsteps the only thing she cared to hear. She didn't look back when she heard the first metallic asterisk clink asterisk of handcuffs. She didn't stop when she heard her mother call her name. She walked straight through the heavy oak doors and into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of the Riley legacy behind her. As she reached the sidewalk, she pulled her phone from her pocket. There was one more call to make, one more string to pull to ensure the audit was final. But as she looked at the screen, a new notification stopped her heart. It wasn't from the DOJ. It was an encrypted message from an unknown number, sent exactly 30 seconds ago. "The money isn't where you think it is, Sabrina. Look at the second ledger." 5 minutes had passed since Sabrina Riley had stepped out of the suffocating opulence of the ballroom and into the biting chill of the night. She sat in the driver's seat of her SUV, the engine idling, the rhythmic tick of the cooling metal a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. The encrypted message on her phone glowed like a radioactive coal in the dark cabin. "The money isn't where you think it is, Sabrina. Look at the second ledger." Her pulse, which had finally begun to settle, spiked again. As a forensic auditor for the DOJ, she knew that the first set of books was for the fools and the second was for the partners. But she had assumed Derek was too arrogant to have partners. She pulled her laptop from the passenger seat, the screen casting a harsh, spectral blue light over her face. Her fingers flew across the keys, bypassing the surface-level encryption of the Riley Family Trust. She found it buried under a shell company titled CR Medical Wellness. The scent of rain-dampened asphalt drifted through her cracked window, mixing with the lingering, cloying aroma of her mother's expensive lily-based perfume that seemed to have clung to her skin. Sabrina stared at the screen, her breath hitching. The second ledger wasn't Derek S. The digital trail didn't lead to crypto wallets or offshore gambling accounts. It led to a private Swiss annuity, and the primary signatory wasn't her brother. It was Cynthia Riley. Every medical emergency, every experimental treatment that Sabrina had slaved to pay for over the last 3 years had been a fabrication. The money hadn't gone to doctors. It had been laundered through a fake foundation and kicked back into an account that was currently sitting at $4 million. A cold, hard rage, sharper than anything she had felt toward Derek, solidified in her chest. Her mother hadn't just enabled the theft. She had been the architect of the vacuum, sucking Sabrina dry while playing the role of the dying martyr. She slammed the laptop shut and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under her heels as she marched back toward the estate. The foyer was a scene of crumbling pretension. Derek was being pressed against the marble wall by Detective Miller, the metallic ratcheting of the second handcuff echoing through the high-vaulted ceiling. Tiffany stood by the fountain, her mascara running in jagged black rivers down her cheeks, clutching her engagement ring as if it were a life raft. "You're a dead woman." Derek screamed, his face a mottled purple. He spat at Sabrina's feet, the saliva landing on her sensible black pumps. "You think you're so smart. You just destroyed the family name. You're nothing without us." Sabrina didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on her mother. Cynthia was slumped in a Louis XIV chair, a silk handkerchief pressed to her fluttering heart. Ronald Riley stood over her, rubbing her shoulders and glaring at Sabrina with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. "Are you happy now, Sabrina?" Ronald barked, his voice trembling. "Your mother is having a heart attack because of your selfishness. You've killed her. I hope the DOJ gives you a medal for being an orphan." "She's not having a heart attack, Dad," Sabrina said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "She's having a panic attack because she knows I found the second ledger." The room went unnaturally still. The only sound was the muffled sob from Tiffany and the heavy, ragged breathing of Derek as Miller began to lead him toward the door. Sabrina walked toward her mother. Cynthia didn't look up. She kept her eyes closed, her chest heaving in a practiced, rhythmic distress. "Open your eyes, Mother," Sabrina commanded. Cynthia's eyelids flickered. How? How can you be so cruel? I'm dying, Sabrina. I need my medicine." "You mean the medicine that costs $12,000 a month?" Sabrina pulled her phone out and held it inches from Cynthia's face. She scrolled through the ledger, the direct transfers from Derek's investment account to the Swiss annuity. "The medicine that seems to be sitting in a Zurich bank account under your maiden name." The color didn't just leave Cynthia Riley's face. It seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a gray, translucent mask of terror. Her carefully curated mask of the suffering mother cracked, her mouth hanging open in a silent, jagged her eyes, usually so sharp with manipulative intent, darted wildly, searching for an escape that no longer existed. The handkerchief she had been clutching fell to the floor, forgotten. I can explain," Cynthia whispered, her voice cracking. The authoritative, velvet tone she used to command the household was gone, replaced by the thin, reedy whine of a cornered animal. "Explain what?" Tiffany stepped forward, her grief turning into a sudden, sharp clarity. She looked from the phone to the woman she had treated like a second mother. "You told me the wedding budget was tight because of your treatments. You made me buy a used dress so you could afford to live another month." "Tiffany, dear, don't listen to her," Ronald started, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked at the screen, his eyes widening as he saw the dates of the transfers. "She's been stealing from me for 3 years, Sabrina said, looking at Detective Miller. "And she's been using Derek's fraud to hide her own. My brother is a thief, but my mother is the one who taught him how to pick the locks." Detective Miller paused at the door, Derek's arm firmly in his grasp. He looked at the phone, then at Cynthia, who was now trembling so violently the chair rattled against the marble. "Detective," Sabrina said, her voice like a closing tomb. "I have the routing numbers for the Swiss account. It's all in the DOJ file I just uploaded. You might want to call for a second car." Cynthia let out a sharp, strangled cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat. She reached out for Ronald's hand, but for the first time in 40 years, he stepped back. He looked at his wife as if she were a stranger, his face twisting in a mixture of realization and disgust. Sabrina leaned down, her face inches from her mother S. The smell of the lilies was nauseating now. "The cancer didn't eat the inheritance, Mother. You did. And now you're going to see if the prison infirmary has a specialist for whatever it is you're faking tonight." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't stay to watch the second set of handcuffs come out. She turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the Riley crest embedded in the floor. As she reached the heavy oak doors, she felt the first few drops of rain on her face. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Check the garage, Sabrina. There's one more thing they didn't tell you about the house." 6 months after the blue and red lights stopped pulsing against the oak trees of the Riley estate, Sabrina Riley stood in her new office on the 42nd floor of the federal building. The floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of a city that looked clean and orderly from this height, a sharp contrast to the wreckage she had left behind in the suburbs. The air in the room was sterile and scented with the faint, sharp tang of ozone from the high-end air purifier humming in the corner. She adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, her fingers brushing against the cool, heavy weight of the watch she'd bought herself with her first paycheck as a senior forensic lead. She was no longer just an auditor. She was the woman the DOJ called when they needed to find money that didn't want to be found. A manila envelope sat on her mahogany desk, the return address marked from the state correctional facility. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. It was the third letter this month from Derek. She picked it up, feeling the cheap, grainy texture of the prison-issued paper. Derek Riley's digital empire had been revealed as a house of cards built on forged signatures and stolen grief. The crypto bro, who had once bragged about buying and selling people like her, was now just inmate number 88,214. According to the latest report from Detective Miller, Derek's arrogance hadn't survived the first week of his 7-year sentence. He tried to use his status to gain favors, only to realize that in a world of concrete and steel, his fake followers and stolen dividends meant less than nothing. Sabrina pulled the letter out. It wasn't an apology, it was a demand. "Sabrina, you have to talk to the warden. They've got me in a cell with a guy who snores and the food is literally making me sick. You're the one who put me here. The least you can do is use your connections to get me a transfer to a minimum security wing. I'm your brother. You're killing Mom by being this heartless." She felt a familiar spark of rage, but it was cooler now, more manageable. He still didn't get it. He still thought the world was a vending machine, and she was the broken coin he could keep slamming into the slot. She dropped the letter into the shredder, watching the machine pull it down and turn his entitlement into confetti. The situation with her mother was even more pathetic. Cynthia Riley's medical drama had finally found a captive audience in the state women's correctional facility. The fainting spells and heart flutters that had once held an entire family hostage were now met with the bored stares of prison nurses and the cold reality of mandatory psychiatric evaluations. There were no lilies here, only the smell of industrial floor wax and the sound of heavy doors locking at 9:00 p.m. Tiffany had been the one to provide the final nail in the coffin. After the reveal at the party, she had handed over a hidden drive Derek had kept in their shared safe. It contained the real reason Derek and Cynthia had been so desperate to keep Sabrina away from the family home. The one more thing in the garage had been a vintage trunk hidden beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets. Inside, Sabrina had found the original, untampered will of their grandfather. It proved that the Riley estate and the entirety of the family trust had been left to Sabrina alone, intended to be her dowry and her legacy. Derek and Cynthia hadn't just stolen a portion of her inheritance. They had spent 20 years gaslighting her into believing she was a charity case in her own home while they drained a fortune that was legally hers. Sabrina walked to the window, the cold glass pressing against her forehead. She had won. The money had been recovered, the property sold, and the villains of her childhood were behind bars. But the silence of the office felt heavy. Her father, Ronald, called her once a week from a cramped one-bedroom apartment. He was a shadow of the man he'd been, his voice thin and trembling. He spent his days at the library or sitting on a park bench, too ashamed to show his face at the country club where he'd once been a board member. Dee tried to protect the golden boy and lost everything in the process, his wife, his home, and the respect of the only child who had actually loved him. "I'm sorry, Sabrina," he had whispered during their last call. "I just wanted us to be a family." "We were a family, Dad," she had replied, her voice steady. "You just chose the wrong members." She turned back to her desk and picked up a framed photograph. It wasn't a picture of the Rileys. It was a photo of her and Tiffany, taken a month ago over coffee. Tiffany was working as a paralegal now, rebuilding a life that wasn't financed by fraud. They were two women who had survived the same storm, bonded by the wreckage. Sabrina set the photo down and picked up a new case file. The victory was complete, but it had cost her the illusion of belonging. She was the sleeping lion that had finally woken up, but in the process of tearing down the cage, she had realized there was no pride left to return to. She was alone at the top of the tower, looking out at a world she had finally conquered, and for the first time in her life, the silence was exactly what she had earned.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.